Is Alexander Usyk an all-time great heavyweight? This is a question that lately has divided opinions. Personally for me, I feel like on a pound for pound scale, across multiple divisions, Usyk has proven himself to be a true all-time great fighter. But solely at heavyweight, has he done enough to put his name amongst the all-time greats in the sport's biggest division? When we truly look at the all-time great heavyweights, you're looking at fighters like Joe Louis, Muhammad Ali, Larry Holmes, Lennox Lewis, and so on and so forth. Now, the similarity between those four names I've mentioned is that all of which were career heavyweights and all had dominant reigns and statistically rack up amongst the highest in heavyweight history. Statistically, Alexander Usyk's 6 title defences at heavyweight pale in comparison to the likes of Larry Holmes' 19 and Joe Louis's 25 consecutive title defences. But statistics don't mean everything. There are other fighters like Joe Frazier, Rocky Marciano, George Foreman that don't have incredibly high stats when it comes to world title wins, but their resumes are phenomenal. Similarly to the likes of Sonny Liston, who only had 2 heavyweight world title fights against Floyd Patterson before losing the title to Muhammad Ali. Liston cemented his place as an all-time great in the run-up to his heavyweight title fight, where he obliterated most of the contenders. Now, the difference with Usyk is that his entire heavyweight career, barring the fight with Chaz Witherspoon, have been his 7 world title fights. Now, it's worth noting, no matter what you think of the era Usyk boxes in, he has fought the 3 very best of his era in Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua and Daniel Dubois, beating all 3 of those men twice. If we look at the first fight against Anthony Joshua and the Anthony Joshua rematch, Joshua had obviously lost to Andy Ruiz, but he had been a fairly dominant champion in the years building up to that, building an underrated resume in my opinion, where he defeated the likes of Vladimir Klitschko, Joseph Parker, Alexander Povetkin and avenged the Ruiz defeat. With Usyk going in at a size disadvantage in just his 3rd fight at heavyweight, having overcome Witherspoon and Derek Chisora, who neither men were on the level of Anthony Joshua, he went in and comprehensively outboxed and outworked one of the top 3 major heavyweights in the world, which in any era is an extremely impressive thing to do. His first victory over Daniel Dubois is one that has got better over time, with Daniel Dubois' form after becoming a 2-time heavyweight champion and defeating top fighters himself like Filip Hrgovic, Fabio Wardley and of course Anthony Joshua in absolutely brutal fashion. And Usyk convincingly stopped Dubois twice. And of course there's the crowning achievement, the undisputed title fight against Tyson Fury, where Usyk was drastically outsized and had to overcome adversity against a much bigger opponent to score what I think is the best win of his career. But even more impressively, he went and won the rematch too. So when we dig into the resume, you can't argue with the quality of it, and the strength of that alone, plus his crowning achievement of being a rare undisputed champion in the 4-belt era, is enough to already put him in the conversation amongst the all-time great heavyweights. But if we judge Usyk's legacy at heavyweight solely on his heavyweight fights, there are a few things that make him fall short from the likes of your Holmes and your Alis and your Lewises. One being the level of activity that he's fought at heavyweight compared to those guys, which isn't his fault, but for large periods of his heavyweight run, he's fought just once a year, which if you look historically, fighters fought a lot more consistently 2 to 3 to 4 times a year in the heavyweight division. And 2 is the fact that he hasn't really been in with many contenders, as opposed to the majority of the other great heavyweight champions. Now, he is still carving out his legacy and there are still top contenders that he'll fight. And in fairness, the 3 major names that he's fought at heavyweight he has beaten twice. But I'm just playing devil's advocate here. And I think with just 7 title wins at heavyweight compared to the all-time great fighters, if we judge his legacy as a heavyweight solely on his heavyweight run, I think that he would arguably just fall short of the very top of the tree. Off of those metrics, I personally believe you would put him around the top 10 mark at heavyweight. Around someone like Ezzard Charles, who moved up from light heavyweight to defeat Joe Louis, Jersey Joe Walcott, and an array of other heavyweights at the time. But there is a twist to this video, and yes, whilst Alexander Usyk had moved up and done a lot of his great work at lower divisions like Ezzard Charles, he hadn't moved up from 175 pounds. That has historically always been the limit for the light heavyweight division, but Usyk was a cruiserweight, which is 200 pounds, and he was one of, if not the best cruiserweight of all time, and he fought in what I believe was the most stacked cruiserweight era of all time. The cruiserweight division was sanctioned by the WBC in 1979, which means a lot of the legendary heavyweights whose legacies we're judging in comparison to Usyk would have boxed fighters around the cruiserweight limit for much of their career. Take Rocky Marciano for instance. The champ weighed anywhere from around 180 to 185 pounds for a large majority of his career. Henry Cooper similarly was a fairly small heavyweight, probably a light heavyweight in today's standards, and Max Schmeling weighed around the cruiserweight limit for his fights with Joe Louis. So if we're comparing Usyk's heavyweight run to those great fighters, I think we could also look at his cruiserweight run and add that in as well. And looking at it that way adds an entirely different perspective to his legacy. Usyk crammed in 7 title fights in his cruiserweight undisputed run in 2 years and 2 months, where he took on a murderer's row of fighters in Murat Gassiev, who is currently ranked in the top 10 in the heavyweight division, Tony Bellew, who similarly moved up to heavyweight after the fight, Maurice Bradis, who's an all-time great 200 pounder, Marco Huck, who is a long reigning 200 pound champion, Michael Hunter, who similarly has moved up to heavyweight since, Krzysztof Glowatsky, and Tabiso Machunan. Now, if we look at his title fights combined against fighters over 200 pounds, then it goes from 7 title wins at heavyweight to 14 world title wins, which is the 6th most in history. Now, of course, these aren't official statistics, but it just shows you the level of quality that Usyk's been fighting over 200 pounds, which wasn't a division before 1979. And yet when we judge Usyk as a heavyweight, we're comparing him to the likes of Joe Frazier and Sonny Liston, Ali, Lewis, Jack Dempsey and so on. Fighters whose heavyweight legacies include a lot of opponents who weigh 200 pounds or below. So if we're judging on those metrics, Usyk then ticks every box to be an all-time great heavyweight. He has the brutal schedule in his cruiserweight days, fighting in constant enemy territory, taking on the giants of the division in Dubois, Joshua and Fury, and he's been fighting championship quality fighters for a decade now, winning his first title in September 2016. Now if we were going to judge on those metrics, Usyk would be a lot higher than his original top 10, and he would certainly be over the likes of Ezzard Charles, fighting fighters at 200 pounds and above. Now if we use this way to judge Usyk's heavyweight legacy, there is one other fighter we can compare him to, and that's Evander Holyfield, who in the late 1980s similarly cleaned up the cruiserweight division in another competitive division before moving up to be a true all-time great heavyweight. Holyfield accumulated 6 title wins at cruiserweight, cleaning up the division and having great fights against Dwight Muhammad whilst defeating highly rated champions in Carlos De Leon. His cruiserweight run spanned just under 2 years before he moved up to heavyweight, where across 18 years Holyfield competed in 19 heavyweight world title fights, winning 10 and becoming a 4-time heavyweight champion of the world. And although he wasn't as dominant a heavyweight as Usyk, he has an unbelievable amount of depth in his resume, with 2 fights against Mike Tyson, 2 fights against Lennox Lewis, multiple fights against Michael Moorer. He fought George Foreman, a trilogy against Riddick Bowe, Burt Cooper, Larry Holmes, Nikolai Valuev, John Ruiz multiple times, Hasim Rahman, Chris Bird, and so on and so forth. So to conclude the question of this video, is Alexander Usyk an all-time great heavyweight? I think if you look at the average size most all-time great heavyweights were fighting, then the answer would be yes in Usyk's case. Having 14 world title wins across a 10-year span is incredibly impressive and puts him statistically amongst the highest ever at 200 plus pounds. But I think the one thing that could strengthen his resume if he is going to continue fighting, which he wants to do, would be to do what Holyfield done and take on 1 or 2 more real top level challengers. And I think it perfectly segues to the potential fight next against Agit Kabayel. I think at this stage of Alexander Usyk's career, it's the perfect fight against a real tough challenger who possesses a style that on the surface you would imagine Usyk may have problems with and will have to dig deep to overcome. And if Usyk wins that fight, there's absolutely no arguments that he's one of the best to ever do it at heavyweight. But I think if you combine his cruiserweight and heavyweight credentials all in one, he already without a doubt has proven himself to be one of the greatest ever at 200 plus pounds.